The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III walked slowly through the corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal drama. His footsteps echoed in the quiet halls, each step heavy with the weight of a decision that would change everything. The king had spent sleepless nights wrestling with information that had come to light about Camilla's family. Information so damaging that it threatened the very foundation of the monarchy he had waited his entire life to lead. Charles paused before a towering portrait of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, her stern gaze seeming to pierce through him from the canvas. He could almost hear her voice reminding him of duty, of the crown's responsibility to remain above reproach. The documents in his hands felt like lead weights, each page containing evidence that made his heart ache with betrayal and disappointment. Parker Bowles' family had been under scrutiny for months. What started as routine background checks had uncovered a web of financial irregularities, questionable business dealings, and associations that could destroy the royal family's carefully maintained reputation. Charles had hoped against hope that the investigations would clear them. But each new revelation only deepened the scandal. Camilla's brother, Parker Bowles, had been secretly selling stories about the royal family to tabloid newspapers for years. The evidence was undeniable. Bank transfers, recorded phone conversations, and testimonies from journalists who had paid him handsomely for inside information. Even worse, Camilla's children from her first marriage had been involved in schemes that exploited their royal connections for personal gain. The king's private secretary, Sir Edward Morrison, approached cautiously. He had been dreading this moment since the final report landed on his desk 3 days ago. Charles looked up from the documents, his face showing the strain of the past weeks. "Your Majesty, the Privy Council is assembled and waiting for your decision," Sir Edward said quietly. Charles nodded slowly. He had consulted with constitutional experts, trusted advisors, and even reached out to other European monarchies facing similar crises. The consensus was clear. The monarchy's survival depended on swift and decisive action, no matter how painful. "Has anyone informed the Queen Consort yet?" Charles asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, Your Majesty. As you requested, we have kept this information strictly confidential until you made your final decision." The king walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens where Camilla often spent her mornings tending to her roses. She had no idea that her world was about to crumble. After years of fighting for acceptance, after finally achieving her dream of standing beside him as his queen, everything was about to be torn away. Charles remembered their early days together, the scandal and controversy that surrounded their relationship. They had weathered so many storms, faced down critics and doubters, and built a life together despite the odds. But this was different. This wasn't about their personal relationship or public opinion. This was about criminal activity that could bring down the crown itself. The evidence showed that. Mark Parker Bowles had been feeding information too hostile. Foreign governments, selling details about state visits, security arrangements, and private conversations he had overheard during family gatherings. The security implications were staggering. Intelligence services from 3 different countries had confirmed that sensitive information about the royal families, movements and activities had been compromised. Even more devastating was the discovery that Camilla's daughter, Lola Lopes, had been using her royal connections to secure lucrative art deals for clients, who were later discovered to be money launderers. The artwork had been used to clean millions of pounds of dirty money, and Laura's gallery had been the perfect front for the operation. Charles felt the weight of betrayal crushing down on him. These weren't distant relatives or casual acquaintances. These were people who sat at his dinner table, who knew his children, who had access to the most intimate details of royal life. The thought that they had been systematically exploiting that access for years made him feel sick. The constitutional implications were clear. The sovereign's spouse and their family must be beyond reproach. Any hint of criminality or corruption could be used by Republican movements to question the legitimacy of the entire monarchical system. Charles had seen what happened to other European royal families when scandal struck. Some had abdicated. Others had been forced into exile. Sir Edward cleared his throat gently. "Your Majesty, there is one more matter." The Metropolitan Police have indicated that arrests will be made within the next 48 hours. They wanted to give you advance notice out of courtesy. Charles closed his eyes, feeling the full weight of kingship settling on his shoulders. He had always known that being monarch would require difficult decisions, but he had never imagined having to choose between his wife's family and the survival of the crown itself. "Prepare the official decree," Charles said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. "The Parker Bowles family is to be permanently banned from all royal residences, functions, and activities. They are to have no contact with any member of the royal family, and all their titles, honors, and privileges are to be revoked immediately." Sir Edward nodded gravely and made notes on his tablet. "And the Queen Consort, Your Majesty? How do you wish to handle her involvement?" Charles was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the gardens where Camilla would soon learn that her family had destroyed everything she had worked so hard to build. "Schedule a private meeting with her in 1 hour. I will tell her myself." Sir Edward left to carry out the king's orders. Charles remained at the window, watching the gardeners tend to Camilla's beloved roses. Soon, those same gardens would witness heartbreak unlike anything the palace had seen in decades. The king knew that in protecting the crown, he was about to break the heart of the woman he loved, and perhaps destroy their marriage in the process. The wheels of justice and constitutional duty were now in motion, and nothing could stop what was about to unfold. The Parker Bowles family's years of deception and exploitation were about to catch up with them, and the consequences would reverberate through the royal family for generations to come. Camilla, Queen Consort, sat in her private study, reviewing correspondence from various charities she patronized. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting a warm glow over her desk where "thank you" letters from children's hospitals and literacy programs were neatly arranged. She had been working tirelessly to establish her legacy as Queen Consort, focusing on causes close to her heart and trying to win over the British public who had once viewed her with suspicion. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see her private secretary with the afternoon schedule. Instead, Charles entered, his face grave and drawn. Something was terribly wrong. She could see it in the way he carried himself, the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he closed the door behind him. "Charles, what's happened?" "You look dreadful," Camilla said, rising from her chair with concern. Her first thought was of their children, or perhaps something had happened to William or Harry. The king moved slowly to the chair across from her desk, his hands clasped tightly together. "Camilla, please sit down. We need to talk about your family." Chill ran down her spine. "My family? What about them? Someone hurt?" Charles pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the desk between them. "For the past 6 months, there has been an ongoing investigation into various members of the Parker Bowles family. I had hoped, had prayed that it would clear them of any wrongdoing, but the evidence is overwhelming." Camilla's hands trembled as she reached for the folder. "What kind of evidence?" "Charles, you're scaring me. Your brother Mark has been selling information about our private life to newspapers and foreign governments for years. The security services have traced payments totaling over £2 million. He has compromised state secrets, revealed details about visiting dignitaries, and even sold information about our security arrangements." The words hit Camilla like physical blows. She opened the folder with shaking hands, seeing bank statements, transcripts of recorded phone calls, and photographs of Mark meeting with known intelligence operatives from hostile nations. Her brother's voice clearly recorded, discussing when Charles would be traveling alone, and which routes were typically used for state visits. "This can't be real," she whispered, her face going pale. "Mark would never. He's loyal to the crown, to our family." Charles leaned forward, his own pain evident in his voice. "There's more, my darling. Lara's art gallery has been used as a front for money laundering. She's been facilitating the sale of artwork that was purchased with the proceeds of drug trafficking and arms dealing. The National Crime Agency has been building a case against her for 18 months. Camilla's hands flew to her mouth as she saw photographs of her daughter at gallery openings, smiling and shaking hands with men who were later identified as international criminals. The evidence showed wire transfers for millions of pounds, all traced back to illegal activities across 3 continents. My children would never knowingly involve themselves in such things, Camilla said desperately. They must have been deceived, used by these criminals. I wanted to believe that too, Charles replied gently. But the evidence shows they knew exactly what they were doing. Laura's personal bank accounts show she received substantial commissions from every transaction. She's been living far beyond her means for years, and this explains how. Camilla stood up abruptly, pacing to the window as tears began to flow. What about Tom? Surely my son isn't involved in this madness. Charles's silence was answer enough. She turned to face him, seeing the devastation in his eyes. Tom has been using his connection to the royal family to secure government contracts for his companies. He's been bribing officials, falsifying documents, and overcharging taxpayers by millions of pounds. Some of those contracts were for military equipment that didn't meet safety standards. Soldiers' lives were put at risk because of substandard gear his companies provided. The Queen Consort collapsed into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her. Her entire family, the people she loved most in the world after Charles, had been systematically betraying the crown and exploiting her position for their own gain. How long have you known? She asked through her tears. The investigation began 6 months ago with Mark. Each revelation led to another family member. I only received the final report 3 days ago. I've been hoping against hope that there would be some explanation, some way to clear their names. Camilla looked up at her husband with eyes full of anguish. What happens now? Can we keep this quiet? Can we handle it privately within the family? Charles shook his head slowly. The Metropolitan Police will be making arrests within 48 hours. The evidence has been shared with international law enforcement agencies. This will become public knowledge very soon, and when it does, it will create the biggest royal scandal in modern history. So what are you saying? What are you asking of me? Not asking anything of you, my darling. I'm telling you what I have to do as king. The Privy Council has been consulted. Constitutional experts have been involved, and the decision is final. Your family must be permanently banned from any contact with the royal family. All their honors, titles, and privileges are revoked immediately. Camilla stared at him in shock. You're banishing my family? Charles, these are my children, my brother. They made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but they're still my blood. They have committed crimes that threaten the security of our nation and the stability of the crown. If I don't act decisively, the monarchy itself could fall. Republican movements across the Commonwealth are already using minor scandals to question our relevance. This would give them everything they need to destroy us. And what about me? Camilla asked, her voice barely audible. Where does this leave? Me? Charles reached across the desk to take her hand, but she pulled away. You had no knowledge of their activities? The investigation cleared you completely. Your position as Queen Consort is secure. Secure? Camilla laughed bitterly. Can my position be secure when my own family is banned from the palace? How can I attend state functions knowing my children can never again be part of my life as queen? How can I smile and wave at crowds when inside I'm dying from the loss of everyone I held dear before I met you? The weight of what was happening began to settle over both of them. Charles had saved the crown, but in doing so, he had shattered the woman he loved. Camilla faced a choice no mother should ever have to make: her family or her crown, her children or her husband's throne. When do you plan to tell them? She asked finally.
Yes.
The palace will issue statements this afternoon. Security will escort them from any royal properties they're currently on. The ban takes effect immediately. Camilla nodded numbly, understanding that her world had just collapsed around her. Everything she had worked for, every relationship she had built, every dream she had harbored about being a grandmother who could share royal traditions with her grandchildren, all of it was gone in an instant. The woman who had fought so hard to become Queen Consort now faced the cruelest irony of all. She had achieved her crown, but lost her family in the process. The palace corridors buzzed with unprecedented activity as staff members hurried between offices, carrying sealed envelopes and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Sir Edward Morrison coordinated the most sensitive operation the royal household had undertaken in decades. Security personnel were being briefed, press statements were being finalized, and legal documents were being prepared for immediate execution in her private apartments. Camilla sat motionless in her favorite armchair, staring at the telephone. In her hands, she had been holding it for over an hour, wanting to call her children but knowing that palace security was likely monitoring all communications. How could she explain to Laura and Tom that their lives were about to be destroyed? How could she warn Mark that police officers were probably already watching his every move? The Queen Consort's personal protection officer, Inspector Sarah Williams, entered quietly. "Ma'am, His Majesty has requested that you remain in your apartments for the remainder of the day. For security reasons, all external communications are temporarily restricted." Camilla looked up with hollow eyes. "Am I a prisoner in my own home?" "Inspector?" "Not at all, ma'am. These are precautionary measures to protect you and the royal family during a very sensitive time. The restrictions will be lifted once the situation is stabilized." After Inspector Williams left, Camilla walked to her bedroom window that overlooked the palace gardens. In the distance, she could see additional security personnel taking positions around the perimeter. The palace was being prepared for siege, and she was trapped inside, unable to reach out to the people who needed her most. Meanwhile, across London, Laura Lopes was having lunch with a potential client at an exclusive Mayfair restaurant when her phone began buzzing incessantly. She glanced at the screen and saw dozens of missed calls from journalists, her assistant, and her husband Harry. Something was very wrong. "Excuse me for just a moment," she told her client, stepping outside to return one of the calls. Her assistant's. His voice was panicked. "Laura, where are you?" "There are reporters everywhere outside the gallery. They're asking about money laundering and your connection to criminals. The police were here an hour ago with a search warrant. They've sealed off the building." Laura's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? What police? What money laundering?" "They had photographs, Laura. Pictures of you with people they're calling international criminals. They said there's an ongoing investigation into your business practices. You need to get here immediately." Laura ended the call and immediately tried to reach her mother at the palace, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried calling the palace switchboard, but was told that the Queen Consort was unavailable and could not be reached. Panic began to set in as she realized that whatever was happening, it was much bigger than just her gallery at the same time. Tom Parker Bowles was in a board meeting at his company headquarters when his secretary burst through the door, her face white with fear. "Mr. Parker Bowles, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are police officers here. They say they need to speak with you immediately." Tom excused himself from the meeting and found 3 serious-looking detectives waiting in his office. Him their warrant and began reading him his rights. As the words washed over him, Tom's mind raced to understand what was happening. He thought of his government contracts, the shortcuts he had taken, the officials he had paid to secure deals. He had always told himself it was just business, just the way things worked in the real world. "Am I under arrest?" Tom asked, his voice shaking. "Not at this time, sir, but we need you to come with us for questioning. This is in connection with ongoing investigations into government contract fraud, bribery, and conspiracy charges." As Tom was escorted from his office building, photographers were already waiting outside. Someone had tipped off the press. His walk of shame was being captured for the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. Mark. Parker Bowles was at his country estate when he noticed unusual activity on the road leading to his property. Cars that didn't belong to his neighbors were parked at strategic points, and he was certain he had seen the same man walking past his gate 3 times in the past hour. His years of selling information had made him paranoid, and he recognized surveillance when he saw it. He went to his study and began destroying documents, feeding papers into his fireplace and deleting files from his computer. But it was too late. The evidence against him had been gathered over years of careful investigation, and his desperate attempt to cover his tracks only made him look more guilty. When the police finally knocked on his door, Mark was almost relieved. The waiting was over as they placed him under arrest. He found himself thinking about Camilla and wondering if she knew what was happening to her family. He had always justified his actions by telling himself that he was providing for his children's future. But now he realized he had destroyed any future his family might have had. Back at the palace, Charles was meeting with his senior advisors and the heads of the security services. The operation to arrest the Parker Bowles family members was proceeding as planned. But the king was deeply concerned about the impact on Camilla. "How is the queen consort handling the situation?" asked Sir Edward. "She's devastated, as you would expect. This is going to test her in ways we cannot imagine. We need to be prepared for every possibility, including the chance that she may choose to abdicate her position to support her family." Now the room fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. A queen consort abandoning her position to stand by her criminal family would create a constitutional crisis unlike anything Britain had faced in modern times. "Have we considered offering her family some kind of plea arrangement?" asked the Attorney General. "Perhaps if they cooperate fully and return any stolen money, we could recommend reduced sentences." Charles shook his head firmly. "The crimes are too serious, and the security implications are too grave. We cannot be seen to be giving special treatment to the royal family's relatives. Justice must be seen to be done regardless of the personal cost." As evening approached, news bulletins began reporting the arrests. The Parker Bowles name was being spoken on every news channel, and reporters were gathering outside every royal residence. The story was too big to contain, and soon the whole world would know that the queen consort's family had been living as criminals while she sat beside the King of England in her apartments. Camilla finally heard about her family's arrests from a news report on television. Seeing her children's faces on screen, described as suspects in serious criminal investigations, she felt something break inside her chest. The woman who had survived decades of public scrutiny and criticism, who had weathered every storm with dignity and grace, finally reached her breaking point. She collapsed to her knees in front of the television, watching her son being led away in handcuffs, her daughter's gallery being sealed by police, and her brother's home being searched by investigators. The family she had protected and loved, the people who had stood by her through her own struggles, were being destroyed while she sat powerless in a palace. It suddenly felt more like a prison than a home. The queen consort's world had not just changed, it had been utterly destroyed, and she knew that the worst was yet to come. Dawn broke over London with an unusual quietness, as if the city itself was holding its breath for what would unfold. The morning newspapers hit the stands with headlines that shook the foundations of the British monarchy. Royal scandal rocks. The Crown screamed at the Times, while the Daily Mail declared Camilla's family arrested in massive crime ring. The story dominated every front page, every news broadcast, every social media platform across the globe. Inside Buckingham Palace, Camilla had not slept. She sat in her dressing gown by the window, watching the sunrise and trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret Thornton, entered quietly with a breakfast tray that would go untouched. "Your Majesty, perhaps you should try to eat something. You'll need your strength for what lies ahead," Margaret said gently. Camilla turned. From the window, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "How can I eat when my children are sitting in police cells? How can I think about strength when everything I've built is crumbling around me?" Margaret had served the royal family for over 30 years and had never seen such anguish in a member of the royal household. "The king has asked to see you whenever you're ready. He's been waiting outside your door since 6 this morning. Tell him I'll see him in an hour. I need to compose myself first." Camilla's voice was hoarse from the tears and the sleepless night. As Margaret left, Camilla walked to her mirror and was shocked by her own reflection. The woman staring back looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. Her face was pale and drawn. Her usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and her eyes held an emptiness that frightened her. She thought about calling her children, but knew that their phones would be monitored and anything she said could be used as evidence. She was completely cut off from the people who needed her most, trapped in a golden cage while her family faced the consequences of their actions alone. An hour later, Charles entered her sitting room to find Camilla dressed and composed, though the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. She had put on her public face, the mask she had perfected over decades of royal scrutiny, but he could see through it to the devastation beneath. "The press coverage is extensive," Charles said carefully, sitting across from her. "Our communications team is working around the clock to manage the situation, but this story has taken on a life of its own." "What exactly are they saying about me?" Camilla asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Most outlets are reporting that you had no knowledge of your family's activities. Investigation cleared you completely, and that's being emphasized in all official statements, however." Charles paused, choosing his words carefully. "However, some people are questioning how I could have been so blind to what was happening around me. They're suggesting that either I was complicit or I was incompetent. Is that what you're trying not to say?" Charles nodded reluctantly. "There are also calls for you to step down from your role as Queen Consort. Some members of Parliament are suggesting that the royal family needs to distance itself completely from this scandal." Camilla stood up abruptly and walked to the fireplace, staring at the family photographs that lined the mantelpiece. Pictures of her children at various royal events, her grandchildren playing in the palace gardens, moments of happiness that now felt like relics from another lifetime. "And what do you think, Charles? You think I should step down? I think you're the victim in all of this. Yet you trusted your family, as any mother would. You loved them unconditionally, as any sister would. That's not a crime, and it's not something you should be punished for. But it's not that simple, is it?" Camilla turned to face him. "The monarchy can't afford to have a queen consort whose family are criminals. Every time I appear in public, people will be reminded of the scandal. Every charity event, every state dinner, every royal tour will be overshadowed by what my family did." Charles stood and moved toward her, but she stepped back, maintaining, "The distance between them can weather this storm together, just as we've weathered every other crisis in our relationship. This is different, and you know it. When we were fighting for acceptance as a couple, we only had to convince people that our love was genuine. Now we're asking them to separate me from my criminal family, to believe that I knew nothing about what was happening right under my nose for years." The conversation was interrupted by Sir Edward, who entered with an urgent expression. "Your Majesties, I apologize for the interruption, but there have been developments that require your immediate attention." "What now?" Charles asked warily. "Laura Lopes has been formally charged with money laundering and conspiracy. Tom Parker Bowles is facing charges related to government contract fraud and bribery. Mark Parker Bowles has been charged with espionage and treason. The Crown Prosecution Service is treating these as the most serious crimes against the state." Camilla gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "Treason? They're charging my brother with treason? The evidence shows he provided classified information to foreign intelligence services, including details about state visits and security arrangements. Under British law, that constitutes treason, which carries a potential life sentence." Room fell silent as the weight of the charges settled over them. This wasn't just a family scandal anymore. It was a matter of national security, and the penalties reflected the severity of the crimes. "There's more," Sir Edward continued. "The opposition has called for an emergency session of Parliament to discuss the implications for the monarchy. They're demanding a full investigation into palace security procedures and questioning whether the royal family can be trusted to protect state secrets." Alice felt the walls closing in around them. He had hoped that swift action would contain the damage, but instead, it seemed to be spreading like wildfire. "What are our legal advisors recommending?" "Complete separation. They're suggesting that the Queen Consort make a public statement denouncing her family's actions and reaffirming her loyalty to the crown. They want her to appear at tomorrow's state function as scheduled, to show that she's moving forward despite the scandal." Camilla laughed bitterly. "They want me to publicly abandon my children and then smile and wave at a state dinner. Want me to pretend that my heart isn't breaking while my family sits in prison cells?" "The alternative," Sir Edward said quietly, "is that the monarchy faces its greatest crisis since the abdication of Edward VIII. Public support is plummeting, and there are serious discussions about whether Britain needs a royal family at all." Magnitude of the situation was becoming clear. This wasn't just about Camilla's family anymore. It was about the survival of the institution that Charles had been born to lead. The crown that he had waited his entire life to wear was being threatened by the very people he had welcomed into his family with open arms. Camilla looked between her husband and his advisor, seeing the fear in their eyes. They were asking her to choose between her family and the throne, between her role as a mother and her duty as queen consort. It was an impossible choice, but one that she was being forced to make with the eyes of the world watching her every move. "I need time to think," she said finally. "I need to understand what each choice means, not just for me, but for everyone I love." As Sir Edward left, Charles reached out to his wife, but she moved away from him once again. The distance between them was growing, and he could feel her slipping away from him, just as surely as the crown was slipping away from both of them. The grand state dinner was scheduled to proceed as planned, a diplomatic event that had been organized months in advance to welcome the President of France and strengthen bilateral relations. The palace staff had worked tirelessly to ensure every detail was perfect, from the finest china to the carefully orchestrated seating arrangements. But the elephant in the room was whether the queen consort would appear at all. Camilla stood in her dressing room, staring at the elegant emerald gown that had been selected for the evening. Her dresser, Mrs. Patricia Holmes, waited patiently nearby, unsure whether to begin the elaborate preparation ritual that typically took hours to complete. "Ma'am, shall we begin?" Mrs. Holmes asked gently. Camilla touched the fabric of the dress, remembering how excited she had been when it was first fitted just 2 weeks ago. She had imagined the photographs that would be taken, the way Charles would look at her across the room, the sense of pride she would feel representing Britain on the world stage. Now, the thought of putting on that dress and pretending everything was normal felt like the ultimate betrayal of her suffering children. "Mrs. Holmes, have you heard from your family today?" Camilla asked suddenly. The dresser was surprised by the personal question. "Yes, ma'am. My daughter called this morning to check on me, given all the commotion. She was worried about how this situation might affect those of us who work closely with you." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that you were the kindest, the most genuine person I've ever had the honor to serve. That whatever your family may have done, it has no bearing on the person you are." Camilla felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Do you have children, Mrs. Holmes?" "3, ma'am. 2 daughters and a son." "Then you understand that no matter what they might do, no matter how disappointed you might be in their choices, you would never stop loving them. You would never abandon them when they needed you most." Mrs. Holmes nodded slowly, beginning to understand the impossible position her employer was in. "That's true, ma'am. A mother's love doesn't come with conditions." 20 minutes before the state dinner was scheduled to begin, Charles entered Camilla's dressing room to find her still in her robe, the emerald gown hanging untouched. His own formal attire was impeccable, but his face showed the strain of the past 48 hours. "Darling, the guests are arriving. The French president is asking to pay his respects to you before dinner begins." Camilla turned from her mirror to face him directly. "I can't do it, Charles. I can't put on that dress and smile at foreign dignitaries while my children are sitting in prison cells. I can't pretend that my world hasn't collapsed just to maintain appearances." "The monarchy is bigger than our personal pain," Charles said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Thousands of people depend on the institution we represent. If we don't show strength now, if we don't demonstrate that the crown can survive this crisis, everything our ancestors built could crumble." "And what about what we've built? What about our marriage, our partnership, our promise to support each other through everything?" "You're asking me to choose between the crown and my children, but you're also asking me to choose between the crown and my conscience." Charles sat heavily in a nearby chair, the weight of kingship pressing down on him like never before. "Know how to solve this? Every decision I make seems to cause more pain, more damage. If I support your family, I'm seen as weak and corrupt. If I abandon them, I'm asking you to do something that goes against every maternal instinct you have." "There's a third option," Camilla said quietly. Charles looked up at her, seeing something in her expression that frightened him. "What are you? Thinking I could step down? I could renounce my title as queen consort and return to being Mrs. Parker Bowles? That would remove the constitutional crisis and allow me to support my family without damaging the monarchy." The suggestion hit Charles like a physical blow. "Can't be serious." After everything we've been through, after fighting for years to be accepted, you would throw it all away. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing what matters most to me. Charles, I love you more than life itself, but those are my children, facing prison sentences. That's my brother being charged with treason. How can I sit in a palace wearing a crown while they suffer alone? Charles stood and began pacing the room, his mind racing through the implications. It stepped down. It validates everyone who ever said our relationship was wrong. It suggests that you were never truly committed to the role, that you were always more loyal to your birth family than to the royal family. Maybe they were right, Camilla said simply. Maybe I was never meant to be queen. Maybe my love for you blinded me to the reality that some people aren't cut out for this life. Before Charles could respond, there was an urgent knock at the door. Sir Edward entered, his face grave with new developments. Your Majesties, I apologize for the interruption, but we've received word from the prison where the Parker Bowles family members are being held. Laura Lopes has been placed on suicide watch after she was found trying to harm herself in her cell. Camilla's knees buckled, and she would have. 3 days later, Camilla stood outside Holloway Prison wearing a simple black coat and dark sunglasses, flanked by 2 discreet protection officers. The media had been kept at bay, but she could feel the weight of telephoto lenses trained on her from distant rooftops. This was her first public appearance since the scandal broke, and the world was watching to see how the Queen Consort would handle visiting her imprisoned daughter. The prison governor, Mrs. Janet Reynolds, met them at a private entrance, away from the main visitor areas. Your Majesty, we've arranged for a private meeting room. Miss Lopes has been informed of your visit and is eager to see you. As they walked through the stark corridors, Camilla was struck by the contrast between this place and the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace. The smell of disinfectant, the echo of footsteps on concrete floors, the heavy doors that clanged shut behind them. This was a world away from anything she had ever experienced. Laura was brought into the meeting room by 2 female guards. She looked pale and thin, her usually perfect appearance replaced by the drab prison uniform and hollow eyes of someone who had lost all hope. When she saw her mother, she broke down completely. Mummy, I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything. I've destroyed your life, your marriage, everything you worked so hard to achieve. Laura sobbed as Camilla held her tightly. Shoo, my darling, you haven't destroyed anything that can't be rebuilt. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere, Camilla whispered, stroking her daughter's hair as she had when Laura was a child. But your crown, your position as queen, the newspapers are saying you might have to give it all up because of what we did. Camilla pulled back to look directly into her daughter's eyes. Laura, listen to me carefully. Crowns and titles are just symbols. They can be taken away or given back, but you are my blood, my heart, my child. Nothing, not even a throne, is more important than that. I didn't know, Laura said desperately. I mean, I knew the money was too good to be true, but I told myself I was just helping wealthy collectors buy art. I never asked the right questions because I was afraid of the answers. We all make choices that seem reasonable at the time, but look terrible in hindsight. What matters now is that you survive. That you find a way to rebuild your life after you've paid for your mistakes. They talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing about Laura's children. About the gallery she had built from nothing. About the dreams that had led her to make such devastating choices. When visiting time ended, Camilla made a promise. That would define the next chapter of her life. I will be here every week until they release you. I'll write to you every day. Your children will know who their grandmother is, and they will understand that our family doesn't abandon each other, no matter what. That evening, Camilla sat in Charles's private study as he reviewed constitutional documents that would formalize her abdication from the role of queen consort. The papers were spread across his desk like a funeral shroud over their shared dreams. The lawyers have worked out most of the details, Charles said quietly. You'll retain a modest pension and security protection, but you'll need to find your own residence. The palace can't be your primary home once you're no longer queen consort. I've been thinking about that. I want to buy a house near the prison where Laura is being held. Somewhere I can visit her regularly and be close when she's eventually released. Charles looked up from the documents, pain evident in his eyes. That could be years, Camilla. Are you prepared to put your entire life on hold for that long? Life isn't on hold. It's finally aligned with my values. For the first time in years, I'm making decisions based on what I believe is right, not what protocol demands or what public opinion expects. And what about us? What happens to our marriage when you're living near a prison and I'm trapped in palaces and state functions? Camilla moved to sit beside him, taking his hands in hers. We'll make it work because we love each other. We'll find ways to be together that don't require me to pretend I don't have a family that needs me. Charles was quiet for a long moment, then asked the question that had been haunting him. Do you blame me for what happened to them? If I had acted differently, if I had found a way to handle this privately, would they still be free? The only people I blame are the ones who made the choices that led us here. You did what you had to do to protect the crown. I'm doing what I have to do to protect my children. Neither of us is wrong. We're just being true to different priorities. 2 weeks later, Camilla stood before a bank of microphones outside Buckingham Palace. Reading a statement that would be heard around the world, she had chosen to wear the same blue dress she had worn when her engagement to Charles was announced, a deliberate symbol of the journey that had brought her to this moment. After much consideration and prayer, I have decided to renounce my title as Queen Consort and step back from all royal duties, effective immediately. This decision allows me to support my family during their time of need while removing any constitutional concerns about the monarchy's connection to their legal troubles. She paused, looking directly into the cameras with the poise that had carried her through decades of public scrutiny. I want to be clear that this decision in no way reflects on His Majesty the King, who has shown remarkable strength and wisdom during this difficult time. The monarchy is in excellent hands, and I have complete confidence in its future. My children made serious mistakes that they are now paying for through the legal system. As their mother, I cannot abandon them in their darkest hour, regardless of the personal cost. I hope the British people will understand that sometimes love requires sacrifice, and that being true to our deepest values is more important than maintaining appearances. The statement concluded with words that brought tears to Charles's eyes as he watched from inside the palace. I have been honored to serve as Queen Consort, but I am prouder still to be a mother who stands by her children when they need her most. That is a crown no one can take away from me. As Camilla walked away from the microphones for the last time as a member of the royal family, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. The weight of public expectation, the constant pressure to be perfect, the impossible balance between duty and love, all of it lifted from her shoulders. 6 months later, Charles made an unprecedented private visit to the small cottage Camilla had purchased near the prison. He found her in the garden, tending to roses she had planted in containers that could be moved when Laura was eventually transferred or released. "You look happy," he said, embracing the woman who was still his wife, even if she was no longer his queen. "I am happy. Happier than I've been in years. Laura's doing better. She's taking university courses and helping other inmates with their legal cases. Tom's case is progressing toward a plea agreement. Even Mark seems to be accepting responsibility for his actions. And us." Camilla smiled. The first genuine smile he had seen from her since the scandal began. We're learning how to be married to each other instead of married to the institution. It turns out I quite like being Mrs. Mountbatten Windsor when she doesn't have to be queen. As they sat together in the small garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, both realized that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go of what you thought you wanted in order to protect what matters most. The crown had survived, the family was healing, and love, tested by the ultimate crisis, had found a way to endure.